Hello my friends, in today's video we will take a look at the state of the Sony E-mount system in the beginning of 2022. Sony E-mount has come a long way since the introduction back in 2010. Today it is the most popular mirrorless mount with the largest selection of cameras and lenses. In this video we will take a look at the strengths and the weaknesses of the E-mount, and I will try to help you decide whether it is the right system to invest into. We will start with a selection of E-mount cameras. Sony has a specific set of design rules or goals that they want to achieve with their camera body design. The first one is compact size. I still think that Sony is the master of packaging and they are not getting enough credit for the amount of technology that they can pack into a very compact camera bodies. Some users would prefer larger bodies, but it is unlikely that Sony will go that way in the near future. Another signature feature of the E-mount is that it is used on everything from entry-level A6100 aps-c camera to the FX9 or even Venice cinema cameras. There were some rumors regarding the limitations imposed by the diameter of the E-mount. That has proven to be a myth. If Sony can make an ultra-compact 20mm f1.8 with perfect corner sharpness at f1.8, and the best 14 to 24mm on the market, the mount size obviously isn't an issue. Sensor performance, autofocus and battery life continue to be common strengths of Sony cameras. Fortunately, Sony has fixed the main menu with the introduction of the A7S3, so that is no longer an issue. For some reason, a common weakness of Sony camera bodies are the screens. Even the high-end A1 and A7S3 use a 1.44 dot screen, which is average resolution at best. The only exceptions are A7R4A and A7R3A, which use an excellent 2.36 dot display. I hope that we will see this display on more Sony cameras in the future. Probably the most important Sony camera in terms of the popularity is the Sony A7 IV. The initial impressions shortly after the release may have been mixed, because over-criticizing everything is very fashionable nowadays, but the real-world use and importantly the sales figures have shown that it is indeed a very capable package. It has some major strengths such as the 33MP sensor, downsampled 7K to 4K video, outstanding autofocus system, very effective in-body image stabilization, and still class-leading battery life. There are some aspects of the A7 IV that are not that great, such as the display resolution or uncompressed raw continuous shooting speed, but it doesn't really have a major weakness. Probably the most discussed aspect of the A7 IV is the 4K 60p crop. Full sensor 4K 60p would have probably made it a no-brainer within the category, but the reality is that no other camera in the category offers that either, and Sony isn't in a position where they would need to be the first to implement it. Especially not if they want to sell more A7S3s with full sensor 120p. The quality of cropped 4K 60p video is also surprisingly good. It is not perfect, but I will say that I think that the A7 IV is the best camera in the class by a solid margin and a relevant platform for future development of the system. A7S3 is another very relevant camera in the current lineup. It is a dedicated video camera with a 12MP sensor. That 12MP sensor does affect the look a little bit. The footage is not as detailed as downsampled 4K, but if you get the sharpening right, the difference won't be that noticeable. Otherwise, it will have a bit of non-LT Arri Alexa softer look, which is not that bad either. The highlight of the A7S3 are 4K video specs that go up to 120p 10-bit 422 with no recording limit. It can shoot RAW video externally, which provides excellent footage for color grading, but definitely make sure that you know what you are getting into with RAW video on mirrorless cameras. A7S3 is basically the ultimate 4K video camera, but that 12MP resolution is rather limiting when it comes to the stills. I think that it is the last low-resolution video camera from Sony. The next generation will probably shoot downsampled 4K 60p, possibly 8K 60p, but we will have to wait a couple of years for that. For the time being, 12MP sensor allows the A7S3 to be basically the ultimate 4K mirrorless camera, which is definitely not a bad thing to say. A7R4 was released back in 2019 and it got an A version upgrade in 2021. A7R4A is very good at being a dedicated high-resolution camera. It still offers the highest resolution of all full-frame cameras and the most detailed stills. It has the usual Sony strengths such as the compact size, great autofocus, ISO and dynamic range, and so on. As a dedicated high-resolution stills camera, it doesn't really have any weaknesses. It just isn't a master of all trades such as the A1. It will be very interesting to see where the A7R line goes from here. 61 megapixel resolution of the A7R4 is in my opinion still more than most users can take advantage of, although I have to say that I definitely enjoy having this kind of resolution in such a small package. Adding more resolution would be, let's say, cool, but I am not sure how many users would actually benefit from that. The second option is to make the A7R5 a faster stills camera and more capable video camera. The problem is that it might get too close to the A1 in that case. Either way, the A7R4A is an immensely capable dedicated stills camera and it will be relevant for many years to come, so I won't be surprised if Sony decides to wait with the replacement. So-called dark horse of the E-mount camera selection might be the A7C line. Much like the A7IV, the A7C got through the period of the criticism to become an increasingly popular offering. It mostly uses technology from A7 III, so the biggest innovation of the A7C is simply the space saving. The size of the A7C is rather shocking. It packs a full-frame sensor with in-body image stabilization in a body weighing just 509 grams. That makes it a very appealing proposition for those who want a full-frame sensor, but don't want to carry a large camera. Naturally, there are some sacrifices to achieve this size. Those are mainly the smaller viewfinder, shallow grip, only one SD card slot, and the lack of some control elements. I think that these are reasonable sacrifices in exchange for that very compact size. I hope that Sony will eventually make the A7C with some of the technology from A7IV. A7RC with a high-resolution sensor would also be a very interesting option in my opinion. I haven't tested the A1 and A9 yet, but those seem to be fantastic cameras for high-speed shooting and 8K video. There are also two third-generation full-frame bodies that serve as a more affordable options. Those are the A7 III and A7R3. Sony A7R3 in my opinion now makes at least as much sense as it did back in 2017. A7R3 also got the A update with 2.36 million dot screen and USB-C 3.2. 42 megapixel output from the A7R3 is still excellent by 2021 standards and it will most likely be excellent in 2025 as well. The price is also really good at the moment. There are some aspects of the A7 III that feel a little bit outdated after the A7 IV release. The autofocus is definitely sufficient for all-round use, but the difference between the A7R3 autofocus and the latest 759-point system is quite noticeable. I still think that the A7 III was the first complete full-frame hybrid mirrorless camera without major weaknesses. It doesn't have the latest video features available in 2021 cameras, but it is still more than sufficient for a lot of hybrid users. There are some areas where it feels a bit outdated, especially in comparison to A7 IV. Those are mainly the electronic viewfinder, old menu system, and the lack of some smart features such as the focus breathing compensation or advanced autofocus tracking modes. Having said that, I think that all of that is acceptable in an entry-level camera. The biggest weakness of the A7 III seems to be the manufacturing cost. The price of the A7 III isn't really much cheaper than it was 4 years ago. With the ongoing supply chain issues and the lack of strong competition in this camera class, I don't think that it will get much cheaper in the foreseeable future. That brings us to the weakness of Sony camera selection, which is the lack of a $999 entry-level full-frame camera similar to Nikon Z5. Despite the very limited feature set of these cameras, it may be an interesting option for the users who want to enter the full-frame system, but I am not optimistic in this regard. Sony can probably sell as many more expensive cameras as they can manufacture at the moment, so releasing something like an A5 wouldn't make much sense for Sony. That brings us to Sony's APS-C cameras. The first thing that needs to be clarified is that the APS-C basically means beginner for Sony. They have said that very clearly back in 2016. If you are waiting for a high-end Sony A7000 series aps-c camera, it is very unlikely that we will ever see that. Full-frame cameras are more than fast enough nowadays, and they can shoot 4K 120p, so the only advantage of aps-c would be the lower price. As I have explained, making cheaper cameras isn't exactly what Sony needs to do at the moment. Sony's current aps-c lineup actually makes sense. On the paper, I shouldn't really like these cameras since they use a lot of 2016 technology, but in the reality, they can still produce very nice real-world output. The two Sony APS-C cameras that make sense in my opinion are A6400 and ZV-E10. The A6500 uses quite an old 24 megapixel sensor, but it still provides very decent image quality and it has by far the best autofocus in the class. The size to performance ratio on the A6400 is excellent, the build quality is also very good, and I even like the controls considering that this is a very small camera. 4K video quality is another major strength of the A6400. It also has a front-facing screen and I think that this is by far the most practical solution. It doesn't use the latest technology and it also doesn't have in-body image stabilization, but at this price point there isn't actually that much that I can criticize. I haven't tested the ZV-E10 yet, but it seems to be a more content creator or vlogging focused version of the A6400. I will try to make a review of the ZV-E10 in the near future. Regarding the E-mount lens selection, that is arguably still the best of all systems, but there are definitely some lenses that are missing in the selection. First of all, there are two great options for f2.8 standard zoom. Sigma 24-70mm f2.8 DGDN has fantastic optical qualities and it is more than good enough even for a 61 megapixel sensor. The dust issues have been solved, the autofocus works great and the build quality is very premium. It costs less than half of the first-party f2.8 standard zooms, so this is a no-brainer in my opinion and a huge strength of the E-mount system. A very valid alternative is Tamron 28-75mm f2.8 Di3 VXD G2. If you want something smaller and you are willing to sacrifice 4mm on the wide end, you can have 540g f2.8 standard zoom with excellent optical qualities. Sony's new 70-200mm f2.8 GM2 is also excellent and older f4 GOSS is a budget option. Sigma and Tamron also make very solid telephoto zooms and some special lenses such as 35-150mm f2-2.8 that I will be reviewing very soon. A huge strength of the E-mount selection are budget-friendly third-party prime lenses. Some of them, such as my favorite Samyang AF 35mm f1.8 FE are brilliant. These budget-friendly lenses make the crop systems a bit of a tough sell nowadays, especially with that pixel density advantage. High-end first-party lenses such as 24mm f1.4 GM, 14mm f1.4 GM or 12-24mm f2.8 GM are also excellent. The reviews of these lenses will also be available on this channel soon. There is one big weakness in the E-mount selection though, and those are f4 zoom lenses. I especially miss a solid 24-70mm f4 and 16-35mm f4. Older Zeiss branded f4 are available, but those are below average by today's standards. I would really like to see a compact and sharp 16-35mm f4 like the one from Panasonic, which is available for the L mount. An equivalent of Nikon Z 24-70mm f4S would also be great. Another great Nikon f4 lens is 14-30mm. Some other lenses such as 24-70mm GM or 28mm f2 could also use Mark II update. To sum up, Sony E-mount is a very well developed system and one of the safest choices for the camera investments in 2022. There is a wide choice of E-mount cameras ranging from A6100 to the FX9. A7 IV is in my opinion the most important Sony camera at the moment and it seems to be a success. APS-C E-mount will most likely continue to be oriented on the beginners and the vloggers. The lens selection is still the largest and arguably the best, but there are some lenses that are missing in the selection. 2022 should also be a good year in terms of the E-mount releases, so I'm looking forward to the new cameras and lenses, and I hope that I will be able to review a lot of them on this channel. So that's it for this video, thank you for watching, I hope that you liked this video and that you have found it to be useful. Stay tuned for more videos and maybe consider subscribing if you don't want to miss my future content. I appreciate your feedback in form of thumbs up or thumbs down. If you would like to ask anything or share your opinion, please do so in the comment section, and see you next time.